Plugging endlessly in a void. I see a group of ghosts that are coming toward me.
I never know what he's going to do. I never know what he's going to do.
It's like it's developing into like a story. I don't get it.
Yeah, I bet it will reveal later on what story it is that he's developing
doubtful.
into. Yeah.
So welcome to Directorpiece Theater. My name is Abe Epperson. I am here
with me, with me, Adam Ganser.
I am joined by, say your name again.
My name's Adam Ganser. I didn't realize I'm here, and then I was supposed to supply the rest of the sentence. My apologies.
No. I kind of just stuttered for a bit because I was like, wait a second. I am here.
Wait, I am here, aren't I?
You read the thing.
I did.
Directorpiece Theater is, if you haven't listened to this, we're two directors. We talk shop about usually films that you don't expect are going to be that good, or
True.
aspects of films that you didn't expect to be more interesting than maybe you saw it the first time. So this episode is an Adam show.
Yeah.
This is Adam's baby.
You tuned in for the right week, listeners. Abe and I have a friendly competition. You'll see. It permeates the episode.
No, we don't.
Yeah. That's right, fuckface.
So,
no, it's great.
Take me through your theory of Unbreakable.
Okay, great. So, hey, today we're going to talk about M. Night Shyamalan. And I think it's fair to say that this episode started with me watching the movie Unbreakable and being interested in like one particular aspect of the filmmaking, and it sort of spun my mind out to like the larger M. Night Shyamalan conversation that I feel is it happens every time a movie of his comes out, right? Like basically every time a movie of his comes out, or there's a new reason for this chat to happen. There's the he sucks or he's great or he's like just sort of the ranking of M. Night Shyamalan. I feel like as a director, I can't think of another filmmaker who is so well known, like universally known, but also such mixed opinions. Right?
Yeah, he's really polarizing, and some of his films are really like objectively bad, and some of them are objectively good. So it's very strange.
He really
to hear people go to
ranges. Yeah, he really ranges, and I also think that it's fair to say people don't always agree on his quality level as a whole. Right, like I've read and heard proponents of M. Night who will say he consistently makes decent films. Like he doesn't have bad films; he has decent films, and he has occasionally excellent movies. Right, so like they'll admit that the quality is not the same across all the films because that would be a pretty absurd point of view. But his floor is decent, and one of the aspects of that argument I often encounter is that he is mostly a financial success, meaning people go to see his movies. Like he consistently makes money. I don't know if that's always true every time, but for a very long time he was commercially successful. And he has recently journeyed into what you might call independent film because he's sort of started self-financing. And that decision has led to a uptick in quality from films like The Visit, Split, and Glass. So like he's still got it, baby. Yeah, right.
You think that you watched The Visit and he's still got it, baby?
I did not, but I see people saying that. I see people saying that.
Okay, I see.
And like I think that's sort of a subtle way of arguing a thing that a lot of movie fans sort of believe in their core, which is like maybe it's the studio. Maybe the studio's the problem with any movie, and specifically his.
It's an interesting. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, right. So, like, let me also just by way of intro, sort of put out there what I think most people really think, which is he's only really made one great movie, and that is Sixth Sense. And he's made a number of movies that you might call good, right? But Sixth Sense is his great movie. And
I don't even agree with that.
Okay, great.
That's fine.
Great. I think most people probably would. I might be wrong about that, but that's an opinion I feel like I've heard the most, is like that was his great one. And then everything after that has been a decline in quality to some degree or another.
It's definitely the most sensational. I'll grant you that, no
Yeah.
matter what. It's the one that put him on the map, rightfully so. That twist, we never saw it coming, and it's a great twist and all that stuff. It's well crafted. Sixth Sense was an experience. It
Definitely.
like took over. God, it was so long ago, but like I remember it taking over just all movie conversation for a while.
Yep. I mean, first of all, it's sort of an anti-Bruce Willis role, which is not even the most memorable thing about it. I mean, Haley Joel Osment's whole career is basically derivative of that performance, right? I mean, or at least can be traced back to that performance.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And I mean, the guy was being compared to Hitchcock after that movie.
Yes, he was, which is insane.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I think it's hard to argue that movies like Lady in the Water or The Happening or like The Last Airbender are good. I think that's a tough argument.
I have an argument to say why The Lady in the Water is an more interesting film than most people think, but it isn't. It doesn't captivate you.
No, it's not interesting in like a emotional
not in the way
way.
that like Signs, you know, obviously Sixth Sense, and this one does.
Unbreakable, right? Yeah,
yeah, which is I think probably by most people considered one of his best, like top 3 probably.
Right, and I think that's right. And I don't know if I've seen all of his films. I've seen like I want to say 7 or 8 of them, something like that. So a lot. This movie I've watched several times. But I will cop to right away. I fell asleep in the theater watching this movie.
That's not an endorsement.
No, it's not. It's one of 2 movies I've fallen asleep in the theater. The other one was AI. And there was like it was not a medical reason. It was like I just got bored. So, you know, I think even this movie, you can make some arguments on either side. But so the point is, though, I think that the jury's kind of still out in some ways on M. Night Shyamalan, despite how much material we have. Like, I think his place in history or his quality as a predictor, like, we don't really know. You know what I mean? Like, you never know what you're going to get with him still. Yeah. So the point being, I think finally we're going to get the answer with this movie Old. I think finally we're going to know if he's good or not.
Will tell. Look, when I saw that trailer, I knew, you know, all right, so we're recording this on the weekend of Old. That's what I've called it, Old Weekend.
Yeah, the dawn of Old. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, like, I'm going to go to it tomorrow. I'm really excited about it. If you follow me on social, my, you know, entire identity has been taken over by the movie Old.
You've loved this shit. You loved it.
Every day I wake up and think about what Old could be about. And then I type it into a machine and people see it. Yeah. You know, we're gonna see what Old says about M. Night Shyamalan.
Absolutely.
That's not what this podcast is about.
It's not. But I've never been more hyped for anything than for you to see Old. Like, Abe seeing Old is my summer blockbuster experience. You know, yeah, I'm really into it.
I love Old.
I want you to
don't know if I love Old.
I want you to be in a mask or some shit when you watch it. I want it to really be a full-fledged thing.
I'm dressed into the nines, baby. I'm pulling out the suit.
Yeah, love it. I really like that idea.
I just got it pressed. Yeah.
I will be liking any photos that cross my desk from that experience. Anyone, I will be liking it. And it will be well deserved.
Yeah, but rightfully so, though, because like in terms of to bring it up, just because like we know what we like and what we don't.
Right.
And obviously that can be true for everybody for M. Night Shyamalan. You know, because it's a matter of opinion. But what's interesting is that he's got such, like, I'm glad you brought this topic because it's such a nebulous thing that I think sometimes people need to be reminded that people can be multiple things.
Right.
They can have multiple experiences that are like, and as filmmakers, some of them are bad for the rest of humanity. Some of them are great. You know, it's like, it's fine. I think it's interesting what you're going to say, only in that, like, I don't think anyone needs to, by the end of this, have come to an opinion about M. Night Shyamalan.
No, I don't think so either.
But maybe you'll be swayed. I don't know. Whatever gets you off, man.
Yeah, for real.
I'm talking to, you know, whoever.
People getting off to this podcast. People who listen to this podcast and get off.
You sickos. All right, let's go.
We're not turning those people away, though. They can listen if they want to
No,
listen.
secretly, I need you.
Yeah, you need it. Yeah, you need to know what's happening.
Go away. Go away. Come back.
Yep.
Come back.
Yep.
Go away. Come back.
So
I love you.
I want to take us on a journey to a more innocent time to investigate this film. This is a time, year 2001, by the way, or 2000. I think it's 2000.
2000.
Yes. This is a time when M. Night Shyamalan could have gotten anything he wanted greenlit. Anything.
Yeah.
This is a time when, like, comic book movies writ large were so atypical that the story of Unbreakable was seen as adventurous and thoughtful, and just a basic introduction into comics was considered a cool plot device. Like, that's how long ago this really was culturally. This happened before, like, the greatest apocalypse we were worried about was Y2K. Like, I just love, like, thinking about, my God, this movie came out in an alternate universe. And, like, the crux of this argument is sort of twofold. I think that Unbreakable represents a better window into who M. Night Shyamalan is as a filmmaker than The Sixth Sense does. And I'm going to show how Unbreakable shows his good things and his sort of flawed approaches, and why we have such a mixed opinion about his work. Specifically because he has a challenging relationship to emotional versus intellectual motivations in his films. And so that's what I kind of want to talk about. I know that seems a little abstract. I'll define those words. But we're going to talk about M. Night Shyamalan's interest or motive in a film being either emotionally based or sort of abstractly intellectually based, and how that does or does not work based on the movie Unbreakable. So, to begin, I want to start with his premises, like not just Unbreakable, but just sort of the premises that M. Night Shyamalan attaches to. Because he's often the writer of his films. That's another thing that, like, makes him unique in cinema history. Is, like, one of the only directors who really consistently is the writer of his film. You know?
Yeah, he seems like an auteur in so many ways, which is I think why, which is hilarious to me. Most people came off the cuff immediately with the Hitchcock references in his career, because he does he's obviously very good at suspense, and he feels like a craftsmanship director, and by that I mean that he's like able to mechanize the tools of the directing toolkit in a way that terrifies you or makes someone like you feel a moment. He's very good at that. He can pull it off. He with his first 3 movies, he did it,
pretty effectively.
So on top of the fact that he was doing that, which is very, like, we immediately go, okay, this guy, it might be an instant classic. We think of Hitchcock because he's working in the same, arenas, but on top of that, he also wrote it. So that means he's even better than Hitchcock. Right. It's just hilarious because Hitchcock, like, he never begged for that comparison. I mean, I don't know what Hitchcock's into.
Right.
And Hitchcock was always a studio director, like, it was a different time. He was never, Auteur wasn't even an option when he was working.
Yeah, the term auteur has come to mean in recent times, has come to sort of imply that the director wrote the script, like, as in the entire idea is generated from the director. But like, that isn't really true historically. Like, two names sprung to mind immediately. One of them was Hitchcock, as you said. The other's Kubrick, and they didn't really write their material.
No, and neither did Steven Spielberg. And
Spielberg
he
doesn't write his
led.
Material. Yeah.
Lucas technically did, though, at the start, right.
It's rare.
These are the It's just when it came to being, but I think it became more of like a definition after the fact, where it's like we need to differentiate some of these directors from others. But yeah. I mean, it's directors aren't very low number of directors are the writers themselves. So it just
very
seems
rare.
impressive.
And certainly not over the long period of their career like he has been. Right? Like, lots of directors will have scripts they wrote or write 1 or 2 of their films or whatever, right? Or co-write some of their scripts. And Night Shyamalan's been the author of most of his movies for a pretty long time. And I think just like taking a step back and thinking about his selection of premises especially the early ones, can tell you sort of why he's such an exciting filmmaker, right? So like what I'm going to do is let me just like read off 3 log lines to you and think about how exciting of a movie that sounds like based on just the log line, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, a troubled child consults a depressed psychologist about his morbid hallucinations only to discover the hallucinations are actually spirits from the afterlife seeking his help.
Yep.
That's a cool movie, right?
It's a good movie.
Yeah. Second one, the sole survivor of a horrific train crash befriends an eccentric comic collector who insists that he is in fact a mythical superhero.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one, a former pastor still struggling from the accidental death of his wife must protect and reassure his family when aliens invade.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's cool. It's like, those all sound like awesome movies. They're not all awesome movies, but they sound like it.
You know what else? You know what else is something that's just blaring at me as we read these over. What's interesting to me is that in all 3 cases, it starts essentially with a character and their personal struggle, and then it introduces I guess twist is what we came to call it, but it wasn't always a twist.
It's not always a
like
twist.
Aliens invading is not a twist.
No.
We just like the fact that he used that format, I think, with his first one, which is crazy. That's just how insane is that as moviegoers we allowed that to happen, culturally.
That he kept doing it, right?
Yeah. What you see though is you see a internal conflict, like a troubled child, a person dealing with guilt, and a former pastor, also dealing with guilt. Yeah, and disillusionment from the faith. They have their personal struggle that is just he just goes completely in a different direction that you wouldn't expect. Mythical superhero, aliens invading, spirits from the afterlife. Yeah. So it's like when we're trying to, examine the brewing pot of what makes a M. Night Shyamalan story, I think it's very interesting to notice that it's always like character first.
It's always character first as a presentation.
Which is not true of all high concept things, like sci-fi traditionally isn't that.
It's not.
Horror isn't.
But also, I mean, this isn't his log line. This is mine. I wrote it. So like, I don't know exactly how he wrote them. But I wrote them.
But it's true of the stories regardless.
Well, that's the thing is like, so you're right in the sense, certainly like from a certain lens, when you read these premises, you're like, these are like really well thought out and scaled stories that juxtapose sort of deeply private primal experiences with epic, unexpected, like often supernatural troubles, right? Like fantastic elements.
Premise offers.
Right. And so if you're a studio executive, you're like, this guy is a golden egg. You know what I mean? Especially when he starts making money, because he has great premises. But see, I think the key difference, though, between Sixth Sense and Unbreakable starts here. Sixth Sense's point of view is a lot more defined and sympathetic than Unbreakable's is. Like, Sixth Sense is being told from the lens of a kid who's being bullied. And so everything that happens is always sort of driven back to that lens of a kid who can't seem to find any peace or hope in his life, and a family that's being torn apart by a thing they don't understand. That primal experience is much more interesting than ghosts, right? The ghosts are cool, and it's a fun way for this movie to go. And certainly the twist is memorable. But the reason that people care is because the single parent family like struggle is the core engine. And that that doesn't really translate in the same way in Unbreakable. So like I represented that in a logline with the sole survivor of a horrific train crash. That is an emotional summary of what happens, but that's not really the engine that motivates this character. The engine that motivates this character, whose name is David Dunn, is that he's sort of like vaguely unsatisfied with his life. A fact that gets developed as like or explained by this comic book guy is like, it's because you're a magical superhero, basically. That's why you're so unhappy, because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And while his reluctance, his being David Dunn's reluctance to explore this idea is like, it's understandable. You can see why he wouldn't do it, right? Because it's too fantastic and it's, he doesn't want to take a lot of risks. That's not like a super deep emotional conflict, right? Like that's a lot much more vague, obtuse conflict. And so it's not as interesting. We're just like because of that, I think the movie begins to feel slow.
I think you're selling it short though, because I don't think that that's the main emotional conflict, to be honest.
What do you think it is?
It's a movie about trauma and dealing with trauma. It's a movie about survivor's guilt, about not being able to move on to better yourself because you.
Go ahead.
Okay,
I interrupted you.
Well, no, it will just just explaining the definition is all. I mean, I feel like
I do know what you mean, but even that is very diffusely deployed in the film, right? Like that's not a driving force. That's a much more passive force, right? And
that is true. I was only going like, but teacher. I was only saying that because you said it's not a deep emotional conflict, and I would.
I mean, for the audience,
I think there's.
I mean, for the
deep
audience,
moments in this.
Right.
I think so. I'm an audience, right? I think so.
Okay, I don't. I think that the audience is more detached from this guy's problem than they are from the kid's problem in The Sixth Sense, right? Like it's a lot more. The movie pushes you out because it expects you to do more analytical work about what's going on than Sixth Sense does, which is sort of the crux of, I think, M. Night Shyamalan's issue as a filmmaker is like, sometimes if you're willing to kind of like attach things that don't necessarily emotionally attach, they do sort of like, ooh, that was cool. But the experience of it is not necessarily going to hit you in the face. Like you can't be a passive watcher and connect all these dots usually. And that's like essentially the problem in my mind with Unbreakable, or why it's not as effective. I'm not saying
it's not as effective.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's not effective at all. Like, I'm just saying
we feel the movie's a little bit slow. Yeah. For example, is something you said, and I was like, yes, that's true. A passive kind of conflict like that, you have to kind of combine the right elements to make it slow, or to not make it not slow. You have to force the screenplay to kind of push it forward through like tricky screenwriting tricks. In order to motivate the scene to be like, hey, character, the thing you don't want to happen is about to happen. Deal with that. That's what screenwriting is, for most part, is finding scenes that are that.
Correct.
And I do think that there are a few deep ones, and I'm sure you agree.
Absolutely.
Like, the scene with him and his son with the gun.
That's the one we're going to talk about later on. Yeah, totally.
Okay.
No, totally. Don't hear me saying that Unbreakable's bad and Sixth Sense is good. I'm not saying that. I'm saying Sixth Sense is more effective as a film because of this distinction. And the distinction is that when the movie is told through the lens of a person's pain that we can immediately and regularly understand and connect to, we're more interested in his subjects. When it isn't, then we're not as interested. And he doesn't always know which one is I don't want to say no. He doesn't always choose lenses that help us get into his movie. Like sometimes he chooses lenses that are less helpful. I actually would say in The Sixth Sense, I want to talk a little bit about the twists because everybody loves the twists in his movie so much.
Oh, the twist!
The twist!
I love the twist!
In Sixth Sense, the twist, of course, is that Bruce Willis is also a ghost, right? And that this child, Cole, I want to say, the kid's name is Cole.
Yeah.
Cole has actually been helping him to move on, in addition to all the other ghosts that he's helped move on, and that's like a cool twist. And that twist helps to sort of heighten and recontextualize the fundamental experience of this movie, which is this kid's sort of pain and growth, right? It doesn't, but it doesn't really fundamentally define what the movie's about. It's just sort of a heightening of it, really. Now, that's not the same thing as what happens in Unbreakable. In Unbreakable, the twist is that Samuel L. Jackson, who plays Elijah is actually the supervillain. And the problem with that reveal, although it is cool, it's very cool, is that Elijah is actually a sort of more compelling character. Because his pain is very omnipresent, right? Like this is a guy who's always getting hurt, always getting ignored, always getting misunderstood, right? And so we
Mhm.
come to sympathize with him, and then the movie decides at the end, yes, but that made him into a maniac, and so we have to sort of our ultimate reaction is, oh, that's cool, but bummer, right? Like we're detached from this
Mhm.
character now instead of the
Mhm.
opposite experience, which is like getting attached to the character more because we realize he's a
Right.
ghost.
Yep.
And again, and this may seem like a very fine line distinction, and sometimes it's not a one-to-one thing, but the experience of the twist in Unbreakable is an intellectual appreciation. That's what makes
Mhm.
us go cool, right? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
he inverted things. Like I'm aware of the movie makers like having done a sleight of hand on me. That's
Your
cool.
brain goes back to all the moments before and you go, oh, I guess that can't.
Yeah.
He covered his base there too.
Right.
You know?
It doesn't necessarily deliver on an emotionally satisfactory level. Whereas I would say the twist in Sixth Sense does. Because we're still waiting for Bruce Willis's like story to resolve. And it resolves it, and also it reinforces rather than abstracts what the concept of the movie is. So, and some people are going to say, "Well, but I like the twist better of this and that." And hey, man, I'm not here to argue your specific experience. Everyone's allowed
Mhm.
to have their specific experience and to defend it as much as they want. But I think you can look at this and understand that the actual emotional mechanic of it is a lot
Mhm.
more abstract in Unbreakable than it is in Sixth Sense. And
I have a random aside question.
I'm ready for it. I'm ready.
Just because I feel like you'll help me through it.
Great.
What would you argue is the main emotional conflict for Bruce Willis in Sixth Sense?
I think he is trying to find out what happened to him. You know, like he's trying to he's trying to bring all these broken pieces of his life together, but he can't because he
Right.
doesn't actually understand what his life is.
Right.
Right?
Which
Like
is
that's a key,
thematically tied to being
right?
a ghost.
Right. And to this kid's experience of his life.
So it's not. So he doesn't even he doesn't know the question even.
But right, exactly. They're on parallel journeys, I would say.
Mhm.
You know, like because I'd say Cole also has this problem, right? He doesn't understand that he is seeing actual ghosts and what they're asking of him.
Right.
That's why he needs Bruce Willis. So like
Mhm.
they're both sort of doing for the other what they can't do for themselves. Right? They're sort of both
Mhm.
helpless. And I think the helplessness is like the fundamental emotional core of it that we're like that keeps us in like engaged. You know.
Mhm.
So and I like that about it. Yeah, I like that about it. Whereas and I again I don't want to dismiss the pain that Bruce Willis's character is having, but like he also sort of like conveniently doesn't remember things the way that, like he's just he's sort of suppressed a lot of things, and
Yeah.
they get
Yeah.
revealed in the course of time in a way that feels very movie like,
Mhm.
not necessarily like not necessarily by like these big emotional catharses. Like I don't know that we're necessarily rooting for him to like, hey man, I hope your family makes it. You know, I hope you're
Yeah. I
like,
know.
are we rooting for
Yeah.
that? Kind of. You know, I mean, a little bit. Are we rooting for his
No,
marriage?
I think I always felt that this viewing reminded me that you really feel the hand holding he does.
Yeah.
That the conversations between him and Robin Wright when they're like, I don't know, when have I been sick last? You know, it's like
Right.
it's
Right.
very obvious that there's expositional, like that's not a dramatic moment. He's also Superman.
Right.
So he's his flaws have to be internal, but B, like the whole idea rests on the fact that he is kind of flawless in a lot of ways. Like he's morally solid as well.
Right. He's just a
So
good guy.
He's a good guy. It's hard to do Superman as a flaw.
Yeah, I mean, and that's going to lead us to talking about the camera moves, because the one flaw they explore is like right up top in this movie, and
Yeah,
I don't know
his marriage. Yeah.
right, but also his marriage is in sort of on the upswing from the very beginning of this movie, really, because they're both open to they're not closed off to each other. Like they're in
Right.
like I'd like to make this work. Yeah, maybe we should try. Yeah, let's try.
It does start with him taking off his wedding ring.
That's the
though.
thing.
Like
Yes.
in terms of screenwriting, I do think that Shyamalan in this moment is nailing it.
Oh, see, I don't think he is nailing that. I think that feels very like very disconnected from the rest of the marriage conflict.
Oh, interesting.
You know, like that's actually my critique of it is like he's actually his marriage. He seems to want to work on his marriage. Like they seem to be in a fight for reasons neither of them understand. So like his attempt to have an affair at the beginning is really just trying to get us to think like, oh, he's in a bad place, or like maybe even judge him a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. There's some of that, but like it doesn't have to be logical for them to be unhappy, right?
It doesn't have to be logical, but it does.
We just know they're unhappy.
It needs to paint a picture where we understand the dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the dynamic gets convoluted.
I think he actually makes it real clean because he's just like, I don't need to explain to you that they, as a unit, they're not working anymore. Like the love is gone, kind of stuff.
But the love isn't gone.
The pit.
You know what I mean?
It is. And then it kind of comes back as he finds his identity. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of any
I hear you.
I just disagree with you.
Yeah, that's okay. But I don't think the movie is making it as clear as you're making it out to be. Because I think the movie sort of contradicts itself numerous times with this issue. Like it's mostly in Robin Wright Penn's character. Because she seems to want to reconcile. She can't really explain what their issues are. And like I guess she's just sort of waiting for him to like figure himself out, and maybe that's the answer. But again, it's not really dialed in a way that we can connect to. Whereas like nobody has to explain to you at all, or can even argue with at all, what the problem is in Sixth Sense. You know what it is. It's like this kid's life has fallen apart, and his mother's life has fallen apart because of this. You know, these ghosts apparently. Also, this like I know this is going to sound like a little dig, and believe me, I do like Unbreakable. I'm not trying to make it sound bad. I'm just trying to contrast it. The other dumb thing about this movie is that sometimes Shyamalan commits to a thing that is cooler on paper than it is in practice, and I think and I think that the fact that Bruce Willis's like weakness is water is one of those things. Not because he can't have a weakness, but because water is so much of the universe, or like of like his life. Yeah,
he really he does that in science.
Yeah, and it's like no, not that.
He's got a thing with water, man.
Yeah,
Lady in the Water. Like I think he's just terrified of water.
Right.
Like I think M. Night Shyamalan is terrified of water.
My suspicion is that he thinks that is like a really unusual cool tick. I think it's the kind of tick that's such a big swing that because it misses, we actually question like, why did you do that? For me, and that's my impression of it. And I think that is a good example of times when M. Night Shyamalan didn't pick a weakness that had an emotional core. Instead, it was like it was cool, like it was cool on a spreadsheet to do this. You know, both.
I like
both
to think
times.
of
what's that?
I like to think of little M. Night. When he's, little boy, he's reading his filmmaking books,
spilling on himself.
And it's like, and his teacher's like, "What's wrong, M. Night?" he's like, "I don't know. It's just water and
you ever realize
water and plants. They freak me out. Okay, they freak me out.
Why does it have?
They're weird.
2 hydrogens. Why does it need 2 hydrogens?
What if the plants are talking? Yeah. I mean, they're all full of water. We're full of water. Right. This is fucked up. Yeah. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Anyway,
you know what I mean?
Going.
It's just it's like being allergic to like dirt. Or like oxygen.
Strange.
It's like, come on now, man.
It's because he wants something elemental. He wants something fundamental to be like. Oh, if his weakness is something that like we all find like whatever, like water's great, because it is, like he feels that will add something, and you're right on paper.
And like that, I think is a good sort of like like a broad summary of this point, which is like I think the best way to create a compelling flaw in a character, like especially a superhero, is to like find something that has emotional value to them and make them like make that the thing, and he, like for instance, Harry Potter, one of his flaw, like his flaw and his like one of his pain points is the fact that his parents were killed by this person who he has to overcome, and the fact that he is like so he sort of is stained emotionally by this, but he's also stained like physically, right, with a scar on his head that also turns out to be a literal prophecy for his destiny. Like that's pretty well mapped out. You know how to do like a superhero flaw, and it tracks emotionally. Whereas this is much more abstract. You get the point. That's the point there. So, this dichotomy that we've been exploring so far also exists in like the camera work, like down to the how he makes his films. Also, sort of shows this flaw that he has. Or I guess conflict that he has, because sometimes I think his choices really work, even if they're not emotional. So one of the things that Unbreakable started to do that other films, or at least The Sixth Sense, didn't do as much, and he started to really do it later, more after Unbreakable, is use unmotivated camera moves. So what I mean by unmotivated camera moves, what does that mean? Camera moves in a movie are generally, and by that I mean something on a dolly or a Steadicam or slider or whatever. They happen because a character is either in motion or is looking at something, and so we follow that look, or because we're in a point of view that indicates either a new person is there or that we're watching given that character's disposition. Essentially, the camera is obligated to move in this trajectory because the drama of the scene demands it from us. And so when that happens, you usually don't even notice the camera move, right? Like a camera move that's motivated is a move that it's just showing you what you expect to see, so you don't think about it, right? And this happens like all the time. Okay, there's so many examples of it. Like you've seen 100 dolly moves where a person looks at a thing, camera pans over to find it, right?
People are fighting, a gun falls out of one of their pockets and slides across the floor.
We follow
Camera
it.
sweeps
Correct.
over to an insert as their eyes, like look at the gun, rack focus. We know what's going to happen next.
Right.
Especially the louder the move, the more we notice it, right? So if it like is a dolly that like sweeps and like turns 180, like these are things where we go, oh, that's a loud camera move, as opposed to just a subtle little like push in or something like that.
That's correct. And also I include, when I use the term motivated camera, I would even include things that are point of view things, like say a camera that creeps in a horror movie that sort of implies there's a person watching or moving toward the subject, or things that are sort of even more obtuse, like the bowling ball cam in the Big Lebowski dream sequence or something. Where we're in a point of view, and that's why the camera's doing what it's doing. And you never think, the camera shouldn't be moving. Why is it doing that? It makes a lot of sense. We've also, in this show, talked about how the point of a lot of camera moves is to create what you might call a sort of continuity of motion, right? Like a feeling of either this thing is in motion or that all the motion is leading us somewhere we expect. So in our Dark Knight episode, for instance, we talked about how the consistent pace and style of the Steadicam sort of gives us a sense of perpetual motion and like lets us relax. Like we're like, okay, we're in good hands, right? I think you said it perfectly in that episode that like Nolan has a speed, like he has a rhythm and a speed, and he sets it up pretty cleanly in that movie. Also, Michael Bay, quite frankly, uses camera moves in this way, and he's very effective with it. It's why he keeps making money. So an unmotivated camera move is when there's no obvious motion cue or drama cue or point of view cue that would necessitate the camera having to move, but it still happens. Right? Now, this happens, by the way, in movies a lot. There's a lot of movies, for instance, where we'll get a dolly up to a person's face, or where there's a Steadicam sort of creeping around a corner to show us something, and there's not a character leading us there. That stuff happens all the time. But unmotivated camera moves feel more obvious to us as an audience because they ask us to stop looking at what we would normally look at in a frame. Like, so they're like, no, we're going to go this way. And they often feel flashy for this reason. A lot of oneers in movies will employ unmotivated camera moves because it's very difficult to motivate a camera move that's a oneer. So sometimes there'll be pieces of a wonder where the camera will just veer into a new area or veer into a new trajectory. And it's not motivated because we want to keep the shot together. And that's the moment where we're like, oh, cool, it's one shot. Oh, right? Like, that's the effect that it has.
What's its motivation? To be over there.
Right?
It's not...
Because it's cool.
It has nothing, emotionally or thematically. It's just got over 2 feet over there.
That's right. Now, honestly, I think I just landed on something I probably should just say. I wish I'd said at the outset, but sometimes when I'm referring to intellectual motives, what I really mean is because it's cool. A lot of intellectual motives in a film are because it's cool.
It's big. It had. I think it's because I learned this lexicon with you. I think you almost always mean that it's something that the director finds interesting that maybe other people don't,
and also that it's not immediately apparent. You have to think about, why did we do that? You know what I mean? So we're being asked to appreciate it on an intellectual level. So M. Night Shyamalan makes deliberately obvious camera moves in Unbreakable that disrupt the rhythm of the scene pretty regularly. It happens a lot in this film. I want to mention 2 examples and sort of what we can learn about him from them. So the first one, and Abe and I were talking about this off mic, is the train scene, which is the second scene in the movie. And in the train scene, we are on a slider, which is a little rail that makes the camera sort of move between one edge of a seat to in between the edge of 2 other seats. And we're watching the entire scene from that camera that slides back and forth at various moments to capture pieces of the drama. Okay, now it's really choice. It's not choice. It's really loud choice.
Yes.
And the reason it's so loud is that you're watching a lot of seat. You're looking at a lot of seat for
the framing, and it moves. It moves not in a way that we're used to.
Correct.
It moves in a way of now someone's interested in what's over here,
right?
And it's almost like you kind of lose the Brechtian aspect
Correct.
of it, where it's oh, wait, who's deciding when I go where?
That's right.
It's like they read the script.
That's right. It starts to feel after a while like a camera move. It starts to feel to the audience the camera's moving to show us something that the director wants us to see, not an intuitive part movement to see everything. And now what's interesting about this move is the director actually tries to motivate it. Okay, but the motivator is an intellectual motivator. So what I mean by that is the scene starts with David Dunn looking at a little girl who is looking from upside down at him. Okay, she's on her head, right? And he looks at her oh, isn't that cute, right? Now this little girl grounds this camera move. The camera move's coming from where the little girl is.
It's her POV. Yeah,
well, it's her POV. I'm going to put that in quotes because it's not upside down. That's the first thing.
She's not upside down.
She is upside down to start. Yes, she is.
Yeah, but then when we see her at the end,
she's right side up, but we never see the camera get oriented for that.
Sure.
Right, and I'm not saying I mean, I know that's nitpicky, but it means that the point of view of the camera is not necessarily 1-to-1. Right? It's not a 1-to-1.
Did you notice? Yeah. I just wanted to point out, did you notice though that the next scene when after the crash is it happened and it cuts to his son, he's upside down?
Yes, I did. There's a lot of upside down, and I believe this little girl is the explanation for it.
Yeah.
So this girl is this little girl's the litmus for the Rosetta
I know where you're going.
Of why there's so much upside down in this movie. So we return to her at the end of this scene, and she's right side up, just like you said, and she seems sad, right? She's a sad kid now.
She was following the drum,
right?
Man.
Exactly, but she's far too young to understand what the hell's going on, right? Which means that she is. It means several things. The first thing is it's a functional thing, right? It's setting up the tragedy of this train accident. There's a kid that we meet that dies, right? So that's the first thing. But again, we have that realization after the fact. So it doesn't actually give us the empathetic experience of it, right? Or excuse me, the sympathetic experience of it. It's one that we have to oh man, and then there's that kid. We have to realize it after the fact. The second thing is...
it's a facade.
No, please, go ahead.
No, it's just, I'm just saying it's a facade. It's most of filmmaking is... And when we see the stitching, we go, oh, don't like that as much. It's not as clever.
Yes, I agree. The other purpose that this kid serves, and I think it's it's hard to exactly summarize it correctly, but essentially the kid is enabling us to judge what David Dunn did there, right?
Yes.
It's a moralization of what he did. It's like, oh man, you're cheating on your wife, which is sort of a functional decision that we have more profoundly when we meet his wife, which again requires kind of an intellectual connection, not necessarily an emotional one, right? Like, and I'm not gonna like die on a hill for that, but like it's a very abstract way of doing that, of like judging his behavior, right? It's like we're gonna put a character whose point of view we're not totally tracking, who gives an expression a kid couldn't give to this experience, so that the audience is like, yeah, that was bad and sad what happened to that guy. You know, now, as you said, and I want to point this out, and this is like one of the things that is cool, right? This is a cool idea. This upside down kid gives us a kind of like motif for this movie, which is that like there's constant sort of people who are not oriented correctly, right? Like there's a visual trope going on in this film where like people are not seeing things correctly because their orientation needs to change, which is a very philosophical way of representing the change, but also it's a cool filmmakery way, and it does work sometimes.
It's thematically involved, right?
Yes, and I like that, right? I think that's cool, but it sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Sure.
Like for instance,
but I just think that with Elijah's, like, I don't know how far you're going to go.
I'm going to go into Elijah's comic book. Is that the next thing you're going to talk about?
His final speech in the movie being exactly explaining why all the point of views in this movie are fucked up.
Yes, and I like that, right? Like I think it's very creative. But the question is, are you getting a visceral present tense emotion from it? You know what I mean? Like, and that's the issue with M. Night Shyamalan in this movie and going forward, is that he has to explain it to you. He has to translate this idea to you that he has that's been happening because you're not directly experiencing it. Like it's not giving you a direct emotional experience. Instead, it's kind of a loud choice that you're sort of like, huh, why did that happen? Right? So like another example of this orientation one specifically, when Elijah gets his first comic book, right? He gets his first comic book. It's outside, right? He doesn't want to go outside because he breaks his bones so easily, and you feel terrible for him, right? It's like, God, this is horrible. So he opens up this box, and it's a comic book. Now the comic book is upside down, right? So the camera sticking on a point of view of this comic book does a full, I want to say it's like a 540, right? It does like a 180 plus a 360, right?
So sick.
Yeah, it's like, sick. Again, it's super cool, but like all we needed was a 180 to explain what was happening. Instead,
I'm following. Yeah.
Instead, we get this gigantic move that is excessive for the translation, and you're sort of left, why did he do that? Right? Like, I think an average audience member is like, why did he do that?
It's a good question.
It is a good question, and it's answered thematically later, but not in the present moment, which I think is a problem for a director. A director needs to create an emotional experience in the moment and then also recontextualize it later. That's what he does in Sixth Sense, and he doesn't always nail it here, even with his cool ideas. Right? I'm ready for you to argue with this because I think it would be constructive.
I'm not arguing with it. I'm just like saying that is highly subjective and taste based because, you know, I think that everyone has their like maximum allowable like I'm gonna give you that birth to if you trust them, I will go to the mat for the Coen brothers, right? Sure. If they do weird choices like they did in Buster Scruggs, for example, a movie later in their career. I
liked Buster Scruggs.
Yeah, I was like, I don't understand that. I still don't understand it. I got it. You know, and I will give the time. I think M. Night Shyamalan is definitely demanding that we give him the whole time, the allotted, you know, runtime of the movie. He really waits until the very end to give you the missing piece.
Absolutely.
That like some people are like, I like that. I in fact prefer that. But some people are bothered by the fact of you never did any. I felt like you were holding my hand the entire way.
But and also not telling me where we're going. Like you're doing
yeah,
both
which
things,
is that's sometimes a part of film, like some storytelling, right? Some people prefer that type of storytelling.
100%.
So that's why I'm saying it's subjective.
It's subjective insofar as whether you think that's good or not. I completely agree with you. But what you did perfectly for me, and why I love you so much, is you just explained why he has a mixed reaction. You just explained it. Like you're right, because not everybody thinks that works. Whereas, honestly, if you can create a visceral emotional experience for an audience, you're going to win over more opinions, right? Like, in general, that is a less disliked way to do a film, you know. And I'm not here to tell you there's one right way. I'm just here to tell you that there's a reason why in film school they hammer that films are emotion machines. It's because people connect to it. And
it works.
Yeah, that's the thing we all connect, like we all want. More diffuse abstract experiences, which personally I have made and failed at. You know that. I've made and failed movies.
We all fail.
Like that.
Yeah.
I like those things, but they don't always work. You know, like you
have to maximize. Story is maximizing your emotion units.
Yes, right.
You know?
Well, that's the thing.
Pump up those numbers, baby. I'm not a robot. I swear.
Well, see, but what's funny about that is if you're maximizing your emotion units, then if you're M. Night Shyamalan, what you're betting on is once the twist gets into place, the emotion units are so high there that you're like, oh, this whole thing is good now, right?
Yeah.
And some people believe that about this movie. Some people do, and I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong. I'm just here to tell you that's why not everybody thinks that.
You know what's another movie like this?
Usual Suspects.
Yes. Yeah. I was going to bring up Enemy.
Yep.
Have you seen Enemy?
A long time ago, but yeah.
You kind of get it in the last. If you hadn't gotten it already, you kind of get it in the last like 1.3 seconds.
And that's a long time to wait. Like even
it's a long time.
Even Mulholland Drive, which is not narratively. Oh yeah,
I've been waiting for you to bring.
I'm gonna bring
Lynch,
it.
baby.
Well, we're gonna do Lynch someday. I don't know when, and I don't know what movie, but probably not his good ones. Probably more like Lost Highway or something. But like.
Shots fired.
I love Lost Highway, but like not his like universally beloved ones is what I'm getting at.
Like the Elephant Man.
Yeah, you can't do the Elephant Man. You know what I mean? Like it's not on this podcast, some other podcast. Anyway,
sure.
Lynch, like Mulholland Drive, in my opinion, starts to really cohere emotionally after like the the Llorando song, right? When the actual transition between characters happens. Right, so like there's a moment where they actually switch characters, and when that happens, it's like, oh, this whole movie starts to really make sense, and it starts to feel like, oh shit, this thing got really intense. In part because that's actually in my opinion, the interpretation. Like everything before that is like an interpretation of what is actually happening, which is the last sixth of the movie, and that's a long time to wait. Some people are gonna be like, I hate that, you know. Thank you for explaining that. So I have one more illustrative point here on this emotionally present versus that's cool continuum, and that is M. Night Shyamalan's staging. Okay, so he has this like conflict in his, or this struggle in his staging. So let me just describe what staging is. So staging is a combination of blocking, which means creating the physical motion the actors do in a scene, and where you're placing the camera. Okay, so staging is both of those things. Staging is a way of talking about where all the physical elements of a scene are set up so that you can capture that scene, right? So M. Night Shyamalan stages scenes to basically like make complicated oneers several times in the film. We already talked about the one on the train. We didn't talk about the very first scene in the movie, which is Elijah's origin, okay? That scene happens in whatever, it's 1960 whatever, and the scene is set up so that there's two mirrors. There's a mirror looking out. You're looking at a doorway at a mirror that shows people approaching this room. It's like a supply closet. And there's a mirror, or a dressing room. It's a dressing room. Then there's a mirror in the dressing room so that you can look at basically like people who are at the reverse end of the dressing room. Like there's no good angle for them.
Very cool.
And what's that?
Just very cool.
It is very cool. It's super cool. So like what happens in the scene is a woman has a baby. This baby is crying. A doctor comes in to check and discovers the baby's bones are broken. And the shot is staged in such a way that it's one shot. Okay, so like the camera tracks the women through the mirror coming in the room, then follows the doctor into the mirror, then pans down to the woman, then pans up for the doctor's reaction, and so on. Okay, and it's again, it is very clever. It has some interesting reveals, and some really interesting angles for different reactions, but it's not like necessary for the emotions of the scene, and it doesn't.
It's
really,
thematically involved.
It's thematically
his
involved.
definition of him, the way in which we define him, the starting terms are a reflection of something, a reflection
Correct.
of a reflection. So,
Correct.
in other words, in order for him to Elijah to find identity, David Dunn has to find identity. David Dunn's identity defines him. He doesn't define himself.
Right,
That's
and
a problem.
so
His main flaw.
you can see how what Abe just explained, right? You can see how you're not going to get that from the first scene of the movie when you're watching it.
No.
You might get it in reflection, in hindsight, if you do a lot of thinking about it. You might get that. And I'm not saying it's not there. It is there, right? Abe's right. It's just that, like, that kind of abstraction is not emotionally available for the audience. And it has some other downsides, right? So, like, one of the downsides is the actors often have to slow down the delivery of their lines so the camera can reposition, and you feel it in that scene several times. Like, you can feel that the director's making them stop so he can repo.
There's a lot of he embraces off-screen dialogue in this movie,
which I like, but that's not how this scene always goes. Like, sometimes the scene waits for the camera to catch the reaction.
It waits for it, yeah.
Which is bad.
It's like it's an important line. He's like, all right, I can't just like let this fly as like background noise. This has to be specifically oriented. So at least he knows that much.
He does know that much, and I love how ballsy he is with off-screen lines. I love it. I admire it so much.
Every time I watch this movie, I have that thought. I go like, I should embrace off-screen lines.
You should be confident.
It's like it's a thing that happens all the time in the past. A lot of older directors, Sidney Lumet, these people were like, that's our bread and butter, baby. I don't care. Like, I don't.
Yeah, we'll be fine.
Yeah, we'll be fine. Don't Look Now, if you've ever seen that. Like, and there's just so many great films that utilize that as like your basic practice, and no one does it anymore. It's just, I don't know, just a random aside about the state of the union.
No, you're right.
Filmmaking.
I mean, right, because it used to be really distracting to do cuts. So like you watch an old movie, like they'll jump into a close up, like especially the ladies close up with all the like Vaseline on the lens, where it's like really like cloudy and beautiful.
Instant sex, yeah.
And they and they're not cutting out of that. You know what I mean? Like they're gonna stick in that for a little bit because that's the big close up. So there's gonna be lines off screen. Like that's
horny
just
old-fashioned hornsters.
Tilting their top hats.
Right there. Yeah, that's the lady. Show her gams.
That's the business.
Just stay there. Don't cut. Don't ever cut, son. No. Yeah. I like what you're pointing out.
No, you're right that it is a classic film language, and he's kind of repurposing it. And I love it, man. I think it's so cool, and I think it's so fun, and I wish that it always worked. I wish it always worked. Now, I want to give an example of when it works incredibly well. Okay, so to contrast why this one doesn't work. So my argument for why this one didn't work is because there's no emotional necessity for it. Right? Like the emotions of the scene don't get heightened by it being a oneer. Like we're watching the scene play out because we're not invested enough in the stakes to know what this oneer means, or invested in the themes to know what they reflect. Okay. Now, by contrast, the scene that Abe brought up earlier, where Joseph, David Dunn's kid, threatens to shoot him to prove that he's a hero, also happens in a oneer that's almost exactly the same as the oneer in the beginning of the movie.
That's right.
And it's fantastic. It is fantastic. Like, we're terrified the entire time because this kid might shoot his father. They believe it, we believe it, and the movie puts us in the point of view of a person in the scene. Like, we're another person in the movie. We're not watching it from some abstract place. Like we're sitting at the table while this is happening. And it's so good that like you don't notice that the camera doesn't really land every little move perfectly. Like it misses a couple times, and it also even has a comedy beat in it that's very funny. right? Where she's like, "Don't shoot people, Joseph." Like it pans over for that and then pans away, and it's so good because this is what M. Night Shyamalan is capable of delivering when he's really nailing it, and that is brilliant camera work that supports a deeply emotional, visceral scene that is one of the best scenes in the movie. You know, and he can do that, and he can do it easily, right? And so you have to admire that about him. I do. I watched that scene. I've watched that scene probably like 15, 20 times, and just like, man, I don't know if I'd ever be gutsy enough to shoot the movie that way. Would you? You know, I don't know.
I believe in myself. No. I
mean, you should. You're a beautiful
I know
man.
what you mean. Yeah, it's a really powerful scene. The only thing I think of is it's like the clarity of limitation, or not limitation in the sense that like someone's limited. I mean, like when you put a gun in a scene, that scene now is about a gun. A loaded gun that's,
of course,
you don't have like, so anyway, I brought this loaded gun, so we should talk about the painting on the wall, you know, like this is a really interesting piece. No, you don't do that. You talk about the fucking gun. So when his back is against the wall and it's like, M. Night, you're writing a scene about someone who's going to shoot someone, there's clarity in that limitation. And I think that's how he's like, I think more to your point, he's kind of in his head a lot. He finds things interesting that aren't necessarily what everyone finds interesting. Because I think he has, I admire a lot about him. I think we both do, because he's very well versed in like the lexicon of
cinema,
historical cinema.
Yeah. And
he knows that this is the kind of stuff that we were occupied with sometimes. And he wants to make a postmodern kind of suggestion about these themes, about these things that tie together the history of film, stories that are told time and time again. He loves cycles. He loves reflections is the ones he does in this one. He literally chooses comic books as a medium that the villain is like just tied intrinsically to. It's the heartbeat of the story. And it's just like, well, that is cool, but it's like not why we love the stories. So like where are the tropes there? Because then he'd have to do something very viscerally unique, like reformatting the comic book for modern age or something, which is hard to do. We've only really seen one company do that, and we're in the middle of it. Shyamalan wanted it to, he was reaching for the highest highs. He was swinging for the fences, and it's most clear that he's good at his job when you just get a simple scene about his son shooting his dad.
I think I think that scene illustrates what he's good at. I don't want anybody to take away from it that like, well, obviously it's a good scene because it's really tense and it's like, you know, there's a gun being pointed around the room.
Absolutely.
Of course that's true, but like there's tons and tons of guns being held at people's faces in movies. They're not all shot like that. You know, he made a decision here that I think really helps the scene.
Yeah.
And it is in tone and thematic with what else, the other work he's done here. And frankly,
and you believe it. You believe
exactly
that kid might shoot.
You believe it. Right.
And for reasons that you think you're starting to believe he's right. Like that's great.
And part of the genius of that camera style is that like it's so unconventional that you start to feel like you don't know what to expect.
Because you're on his back the whole time.
You're on his back, and like you're panning over
into it.
Well, you're panning over to where the gunshot might be. You like you know what I mean? Like a lot of times those moves in movies set up a gunshot, like set up us seeing the gunshot. And instead he uses that. He sort of keeps like will they, won't they with the pans. Mm-hmm. And it really works. It's great. And
after it's done panning around, how funny would it be if it cut and it just is the little girl on the train? Like she's just watching the whole time.
Yeah, upside down again. Yeah, I love it.
She's just like, what's going on with this family?
Yeah, like I'm so sad about it. Everybody's sad.
Where's Haley Joel Osment?
Where's that kid's parent? Yeah, for sure. So thank you. Appreciate that. So I hope that that this exploration of a couple avenues of his filmmaking have highlighted for one thing, a challenge that every director has, right? Like, because the idea of communicating your ideas in an emotionally available way to the audience, like that's the challenge every director faces. Mm-hmm. And almost every time that we're critiquing any director for being like not good at their job, right? Putting that in quotes, it's because their idea was communicated in a way we didn't agree with. You know, it's rarely because the idea wasn't communicated at all, or because like they're missing steps and stuff. Like it happens sometimes, but rarely. Most of the time, it's because that barrier from one brain to another wasn't crossed. And I think that the hate on M. Night Shyamalan has gone a little too far because we're forgetting like how often he is very successful at that. You know, and also like, and like, I know this may sound very self-congratulatory, but like, I think you have to admire a filmmaker who really bets hard on his ideas. You know, like this guy was not, it's at one point in his career at least, was not afraid to do the biggest, boldest swing and leave it in the movie and be like, it works, damn it. Because that's what we all as filmmakers dream of doing. Like he is doing the dream when he does that. And I like that.
We like love him for it. We aren't like jealous. It's like it's the thing that unites the entire camp.
Yes,
it's filmmakers.
It's like every time somebody like Babe Ruths his way into a scene, right, where he's calling his shot and does it. Yeah. You admire it. You're like, dude, you did it, man.
You're just like,
that
man,
rules.
That's some goat shit. Yeah,
that's awesome. You know, I also personally appreciate how often M. Night Shyamalan very just effortlessly creates mood and tone with a camera. You know what I mean? Like he's so good at it, and it's like second nature to him. It's almost as good as Edgar Wright is with comedy.
He's like Edgar Spielbergian, also.
Yeah. Yes, Edgar Wright is effortless at creating jokes with camera. Like it's so easy for him. Right. And I think M. Night is like that with like thriller, like the thriller vibe. He is effortless at it. So
it's a good word.
Yeah. I think he's also a good sort of case study in why cool ideas and cool premises don't necessarily make a good film. Like just because the premise is cool doesn't mean the film is going to be good. It's really hard to remember that, especially when you're a successful filmmaker, because premises get money. You know what I mean? Like that's the deal. But I think M. Night Shyamalan is a good test case for like when a clever premise, like when it really works, it's everything we want a movie to be, and when it doesn't work, we should remember the cool premise isn't a guarantee that the film will be good. You know, and I think that's a good lesson for all of us film watchers. And I just want to finish this episode by saying, do you remember a time when just talking about a comic book could be an interesting premise for a movie? Because that feels like ancient
comic books and
ancient idea.
Now it used to be niche, you know, like
right. This was like, ooh, comics, what an idea.
Right. And it was also like, remember when like someone said comic book? Now everyone is thinking of the type of like jolts of thoughts in like the zeitgeist's mind, you know, cool, like collectively, I guess, are like thought of like, oh yeah, where you have these superheroes and supervillain, light versus dark, these big sweeping kind of like metaphorical tales. Right. It's not that they aren't that anymore, but they're just so ubiquitous and around, and that they're kind of all story. You kind of feel like, well, comic books are just like normal stories, like Lovecraft Country. If you watch that TV show, that like feels like a comic book. All movies starting to feel like comic books.
Right, comic books becoming the prime medium.
Yeah, right. It's becoming this like very dualistic kind of approach to movies, where it's this like eternal battle of dark and light. Hey, I am really into that as like a thing in storytelling. It's very effective. It's very fundamental. It gets into our hearts as like one of the biggest questions to answer as humans. It's what draws us to comic books. But it's also interesting, I think, as you rightfully pointed out, when this movie does it, it feels like it's saying like, this is something unique to that tradition. But now that, since that tradition has kind of become all filmic tradition, the lexicon is now shorthanded. That is just the this is just what it is. This is just the reality we're in, is where comic book-esque characters are who are playing our leading men and women and whatnot. It's just very strange how even in 20 years, the entire landscape can totally warp.
I mean, right. That's what's striking to me about it, is like, wow, we really expect different things out of movies than we did when he made this.
Mhm.
I think the reason I like it still is that he's talking about a version of comic books that I find more interesting than comics usually.
Mhm.
Like the idea that comic books point to a sort of deeper human experience, and like exploring that deeper human experience
Is unique. Yeah.
Well, yeah, they
Even
don't do
today.
it much in comic book movies, and that's what I like about it. You know,
It's pretty rad
Yeah.
that like the arc of the story is that he does he does the most heroic thing. He saves a family, or
Yep.
at least 2 kids. But like the mundane aspect of how he accomplishes it, all the way down to like it surprises him. Like he just kind of stumbles upon it. He almost dies from a very mundane, once again, water. He almost drowns in a pool. Like all that stuff. That's the lead up. That's the big moment. It's not, people crashing through, painted glass panes, and
he doesn't.
like
M. Night doesn't ever collapse into sensationalism with his comic tropes. Like the way that Bruce Willis disposes of the bad guy is like he just chokes him out, and he's like so strong that this guy can't escape.
he
That's
just
it.
can't get it. Yeah,
That's
he's
it.
unbreakable. Yeah,
Yeah, he's unbreakable. Right. That's his superpower. Is like, you're done once he gets a hold of you. That's it.
He's just Rocky.
Right, but it's not the Matrix, right? It's not throwing a dude through a wall, and it's not shooting a beam out of your hand or whatever. And I think that M. Night Shyamalan was wise to undersell that, because it keeps the focus on the human aspect of comic books. Like it keeps us focused on like the emotional experience of being this kind of a figure, which again, even though there's a lot of comics and movies about comics that are about that subject, Unbreakable's a lot more visceral than like most Batman, or most Supermans or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, not necessarily better, but like, but this is a guy who really journeys from self-doubt into acceptance in a way that's not very tropey. And I like that about it.
Yeah. I do think Unbreakable could have a better title.
Yeah, I think that like M. Night Shyamalan had his finger on some cool stuff here, like a lot of really cool stuff, and a lot of emotionally interesting stuff, and like nailed a lot of it, but not all of it, and which I think is why people don't always remember this movie. Like I don't know if I'm right about this, but I feel like people remember Signs even more than this. Partly because Signs, I think, is worse. So I think like the disappointment of Signs kind of made it stick around. Right?
Yeah.
But am I wrong about that? I feel like Unbreakable's kind of flying under the radar now.
Yeah, it is. I just think it would be better if it was called Strong Man versus Brain Man. Don't you?
You don't believe in anything.
No,
it's
all chaos.
Yeah,
Life
you're a
is
black
a
hole in
cavalcade
there.
of chaos.
Yeah,
Just a constant fire hydrant of happening.
a lot of nihilism in there.
Yeah, it's dark in here.
Yeah.
I need help. Who turned off the lights? All right.
Yeah.
I'm good. That was well said, sir.
Thank you. I enjoyed our dialogue throughout about it, because I don't expect everyone to agree with what is basically a judgmental take on M. Night Shyamalan. Like it's fundamentally moralizing.
I actually think it's a very balanced take. You're not saying M. Night's good or bad. You're just saying, hey guys, hey everybody, it can be both.
Right. Well, here's why. Right. Like I'm going to explain to you. It's the kind of thing
that might be. I think I was there was elucidations.
Okay.
If that's a word for me. As well,
yeah.
I think that hopefully you enjoyed this.
I did. Elucidating Abe. I love elucidating Abe.
No. I'm just talking about the audience.
Oh, the audience. Well, who knows?
By
we'll find out.
You, the author. And if you liked more of that, come to our Patreon and all that.
Right. Yeah, please, if you enjoy Directorpiece and you got $1 to spare and you haven't already given us one of your spare bucks,
maybe think
toss it our way. We'll take it.
You're going to see another one of these, and it's going to be my turn in like 2 weeks. I love these.
I do too.
These are so good, dude.
I really enjoy Directorpiece, making it as a creator, because it makes me watch movies I wouldn't watch, or revisit movies I wouldn't revisit. You know, and it makes me think about my craft, which I love. It's my beloved craft. You know, so and M. Night Shyamalan, if you ever hear this, hey man, we love you. You're a great filmmaker. Yeah, I'm jealous of all the great things you've done. So don't let anything I said here take away from that, because that's the truth.
Also, is I don't think Mark Wahlberg's like a cool guy, right? He seems like a dick, but like, tell me if you thought he's a cool guy or not. Like, I want to.
I'd like to know. Give us the Marky truth.
Objective opinion on Mark Wahlberg. Yeah. That would be an interesting thing to hear from.
I'd like to close the book on how to feel about Mark Wahlberg. I'd like to.
No, it's train's already left that station, but good work.
Thank you.
This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The Beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the small beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you!